Good evening. Welcome to the Brattleboro Selectboard meeting of Tuesday, May 21st. We convened at 5:45 p.m. for an executive session where we took no action, and at the time asked if the meeting had been properly warned, but I will just double check. John, was the meeting in fact properly warned?
Yes, Daniel, it was.
Wonderful. First order of business is to approve the minutes from May 7th, 2024. Can I have a motion? Richard?
Move we approve the minutes as.
Okay, Richard has made the motion to approve the minutes from May 7th, 2024 as written. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favour of approving the minutes, please raise their hand and say aye.
Aye.
Aye, it passes 5-0. Next item of business is Chair's remarks. And one day I will be ready for this item. I have three things I would like to say. The first is to kind of remind the public that each month the town departments put together a monthly report that is actually really informative and comes as part of our backup material. There's all these pages of it. And in those reports, one can learn about what the departments have been up to each month. In particular, I want to just call out the Brattleboro Police Department for their work in April. The personnel responded to 952 calls for service during that month. And I shared that information with a friend of mine, and they were like, is that a whole year? No, that's 1 month. So I want to thank those people that responded to those calls and the people that answered the calls as well in order to get a response. So that's dispatch for their hard work and their commitment to our town. Secondly, I want to point out that the Charter Review Commission is doing really important work in the community. Last Thursday, I think, last week at some point, they held a meeting where they discussed RTM and whether we should continue to have RTM in its current form. They discussed a whole bunch of matters and had a large number of people participating in person and on Zoom. The meeting didn't result in any actual decisions being made. This is a process that's ongoing. And I think that folks who have opinions about things like our town meeting, things like our select board, all the things that are in the charter that underpin, many of our laws here in town, should really get engaged with that process. So you can find out more on the town website by going to government committees and then looking for the Charter Review Commission. Or you can be in touch with Kate O'Connor, who's the chair of the commission. And then finally, I just want to shout out the library for doing what looks like a really great series of events in this next couple of weeks. Tomorrow evening, they have an event titled Harm Reduction and Overdose Prevention 101. The meeting will address questions such as what is harm reduction, how can we address stigma, what is an opioid overdose, and how can we recognize the signs. And we'll also provide a Narcan training. The Field to Fork tool library, aka the Big Red Shed, is now open, and on Wednesdays between 6 and 7:30, Fridays between 3:30 and 5:30, and Saturdays between 10 and 12. Library card holders can go to the library and pick up all kinds of interesting things like tools and implements and some small appliances. It's pretty great. And then the other thing I'd like to point out that's happening at the library on May 28th, there will be a community discussion entitled How Do We Feel About Homelessness from 6 to 7:30. And that discussion will build on an event that was held by Meg Mott, a constitutional expert that looked at questions to do with homelessness and land. And I think that's something that a lot of people in our community care about, have feelings about, and hopefully they can attend and get some value out of that. So that is my extremely long chair's remarks. And now I shall pass it on to John for manager's comments.
Yes, thanks, Daniel. So I'm glad Dan Tyler and Pete Lynch are in the room this morning, this evening, because I wanted to start out by letting you all know that this week is National Public Works Appreciation Week. And I wanted to take a minute to thank the Brattleboro Public Works professionals who maintain our streets and sidewalks, who keep our great water supply in high quality, who make sure we handle our waste properly and maintain our facilities so well. So if you run into a DPW worker this week, please let them know how much we appreciate all of that. It is also the 50th anniversary of National EMS Week. So we want to say thank you and honor all those who served as emergency medical responders, and thank all the EMS providers and that continue to provide this important service every day in our community and around the country. The Living Memorial Park pool will be opening for the season on Saturday, June 15th. Swim lesson registration is scheduled for June 15th, 20th, and 21st from 10 a.m. to noon at the pool. The Rec and Parks Department is also still taking registration for summer camps and programs in person at 207 Main Street in the Gibson-Aiken building or online at brattleboro.gov. There will be a public forum on the future of Estiville Common, also known as Fuller Park, on Thursday, June 20th from 6 to 7:30 p.m. at the park on the corner of Pleasant, Esty, and Chestnut Streets. Please bring a lawn chair if you're interested in talking about the future of that park. There will also be an open house on the town pool feasibility study, Tuesday, June 25th, with a rain date of Wednesday, June 26th. That open house will be at the Living Memorial Park pool, and it will be from 3:30 to 6:30 p.m. Finally, I wanted to remind everyone about the Town Committees Fair next Wednesday, May 29th. The board will be announcing vacancies on town committees later in this meeting tonight. And this Town Committees Fair is a great way to come learn more about giving back to the town, meeting others who like to help out, and learning how to get involved in the community. All are welcome. The committee fair will be on Wednesday, May 29th from 6 to 7 p.m. at Brooks Memorial Library. And that's all I have tonight. Daniel.
Thanks, John. Okay, next up is Select Board comments and committee reports. Elizabeth?
Thank you, Daniel. So Peter and John and I and other members of town staff attended the CEVED Summit today, and I thought it was very good for us to have done so. There was a lot of interesting network and ideas, and I think the town made a lot of good connections and collaborations with other towns, and overall good for us. So thank you.
Great. Thank you. Other board members? Peter?
Yeah. So I just did want to recognize that I don't know about the rest of the board. I know that I've personally received text messages from citizens, emails from citizens, some of them coming through proper channels, some of them coming through cell phone, texting, all that, about issues that are happening in town. I just wanted to take a moment just to acknowledge that I've received those and that these are all issues that we are addressing and will continue to address. So if we could just be a little patient as while we address those, I promise you something will begin to happen here shortly.
Franz or Richard? No? Okay. So next up is public participation for the public to comment or provide information or questions about things that are not on tonight's agenda. And so first of all, I will look to folks in the room. Seeing none. And looks like we've got a couple of hands on Zoom. I'll just remind folks that we asked for you to keep it to 3 minutes or less. And if you could just introduce yourself before you're recognized. I think we'll go with Jane first. Patrick? Yes. Jane, can you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me? Hi, I'm Jane Wheeler, and I went to the Senior Solutions Advisory Board meeting the end of last month, and I just wanted to give a little update about that. What we mostly did is had a presentation and reviewed some information from the state health insurance program. They assist people with Medicare, getting onto Medicare if there's any big Medicare questions. I've been to one of their Medicare boot camps, which is quite informative. And now they've actually put the PowerPoint presentation about some decisions and deadlines that you have to meet when you're signing up for Medicare on their website. So I would encourage people to go look at that and to really keep them in mind if they have any problems wading through Medicare. And they may find out that they're eligible for other programs. One of the things I found out is that the case management for people that are on Choices for Care program, that's the long-term care Medicaid program, will all now be case managed through Senior Solutions. And I know they're in the process of hiring new case managers, and there may be one or two now still hired in the Brattleboro area. And also to let people know that along with calling the helpline for any information and help that you need in accessing resources, Senior Solutions has contracted with a company called True Alta. I'm not sure if I got that right, but it's a free online caregiving resource. It's education and community information for family managing care at home. I went on it because I wanted to see what it was like, and I have experience with that, taking care of my mom for a couple of years. And I have to say that it's kind of good to have the information now before there's a crisis, and to encourage people to find out what's out there. And just to say a couple things about May was designated as Older Americans Month, and just keep in mind the contributions that older Americans have towards supporting our communities, and to reaffirm there's commitments to serve the older adults in our communities, but also for older adults to be active. We have a lot of talent. All right, thanks. That's it.
Thank you, Jane. Thank you for your service on that advisory council and that report back. Mr. Ozer?
Hello, can you hear me? So I just want to make this a very brief statement. I know that we're all trying to figure out what to do with solid waste and hauling and that'll be on the agenda at some other time. But there are a lot of surrounding communities that are going through the same problem at this point, and not really good answers. But there is a meeting on the 29th of May at 6:30 next Wednesday in Vernon. And they will be doing an informational meeting. So there might be an opportunity to pick up some tidbits of how this whole situation with solid waste is working out. It'll be at the Vernon Elementary School. And if you want more information, go to vernonvt.org, go to their news and notices, and there's a special meeting flyer that gives a lot of information about solid waste. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks for that information. Any other members of the public that would like to comment on something that is not on tonight's agenda? Okay. Seeing none, we will move on to old business. No consent agenda today. First item of old business, we have a possible ordinance change. Chapter 1.5, sections 2 and 17, and that's a second reading. This is about alcoholic beverages, and I believe Patrick Morland is going to walk us through it.
Yes, sir. Good evening. So tonight, you're right, it's a second reading of a change to Brattleboro Code of Ordinance, Chapter 1.5, the consumption of alcoholic beverages in public. The purpose of this particular ordinance change is to enable restaurants that choose to put out tabletops out in front of their restaurant on the sidewalk to have the opportunity to be able to serve beer or wine with their other food offerings. Presently, that type of activity is expressly prohibited by Chapter 1.5, and this would enable it to be possible. In order for that to occur at any given location, the restaurant or applicant would need to still go through the state licensing process of achieving a liquor license. And on top of that, they would have an additional step of needing to convince the town manager that this is a good idea. And with those two sign-offs, then they would be able to potentially serve beer or wine with their food offerings tabletop and on the sidewalk out in front of the restaurant.
Very good. Thank you, Patrick, for that brief presentation and reminder. So this is a second reading. We heard about this a couple of weeks back. Let's start with a motion. Somebody like to make one? Elizabeth?
I move to adopt the changes to the Brattleboro Code of Ordinances, Chapter 1.5, Alcoholic Beverages, Sections 2 and 17, as presented.
Thank you. Any discussion on that motion? Elizabeth?
Having made some comments at the prior meeting, my concern was that I just wanted to make sure that this process didn't allow general open carry of alcoholic beverages, and it does not. And I'm happy with the changes as presented.
Very well, thank you. Other board members? No? Okay. Members of the public that wish to comment on this item? Seeing none in the room, seeing none on Zoom. So Elizabeth has made a motion. We're ready to consider that, it seems like. She made a motion to adopt the changes to the Brattleboro Code of Ordinances, Chapters 1.5, Alcoholic Beverages, Sections 2 and 17, as presented. All those in favor, please raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Passes 5-0. Okay. Speedily dispatched onto the FY25 utility fund budget. And we are getting a second look at this. Patrick, would you like to give us a little run through?
Sure, happy to. So as the board will recall, we took a look at the utility fund budget 2 weeks ago at your meeting on May 7th. At that point in time, staff presented the utility fund budget with the previously approved 1% rate increases, and that showed quite a deficit. Over the course of our last discussion, staff pointed out that there were a number of operating expenses that had grown significantly. And in addition to that, there were a good many capital projects that have been identified of substantial costs that are, while a few years out in front of us, we need to be prepared for today. And as a consequence, there seemed to be a sense at that meeting that the board would consider revisiting the budget with staff's recommended 5% rate increase. And so the budget that's before you this evening in the board backup is identical on the expense side to the previous version. And the only change is really on the front side in the revenue section, where it has been rates have been increased to a 5% increase as opposed to the previous 1% increase.
Great. Thanks, Patrick. I guess I just want to point out that the rate change is a later agenda item, so we'll keep comments in this item to the budget itself. With that being said, would somebody like to make a motion? Elizabeth.
I move to approve the FY25 utility fund budget.
Great. Any discussion on this item? Richard.
I'm just wondering if I'm looking at this correctly, even with a 5% level of that, we're still going to have a deficit of $241,000.
That's correct, sir.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there will still be a deficit in this particular year. And that is, it's okay. It's not the best outcome in the world, but it's okay to what we want to ensure is that the town is not overcharging the public. So it's okay in certain years to be able to maybe spend down some of your accumulated reserve. But at the same point in time, this particular action, the 5% rate increase, positions us much better further out in time. In 5 years' time, we will, if we sustain this effort, be in a much better position to be able to manage our current year operating expenses and our future capital liabilities by preparing now with a 5-year increase, even though the outcome in fiscal 25 will be a lowering of cash reserves.
But over that 5-year period, that deficit will not exist?
Correct.
At the end of 5 years?
Absolutely.
So basically, we would be even?
We would be setting ourselves on a trend to start slowly increasing our cash reserves.
Oh.
So.
Thanks, Patrick. Thanks, Richard. So, as I understood it, in the budget that we were considering the other week, and you said the only change here is that we've got the revenue based on a 5% rate increase, that there was a approximately $250,000 grant from the EDA that landed on our balance sheet in a different time than we thought it would, which caused some things. Could you sort of just kind of walk us through that?
Sure.
And that's implication in this budget, please?
So the amount of the grant was $440,000. Mm-hmm. It was previously anticipated that we would receive it in fiscal 23. We did not. The project it just took a few more months longer than initially anticipated. And so those grant funds have been received by the town, and they've been received in fiscal 24. So there is embedded, the balance of the fund is going to be $440,000 better than what it's effectively showing in the cash reconciliation.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I think that's the statement that I wanted to hear, that, because when we looked at it last time, it didn't seem that money was kind of showing up here. And is that accurate?
It is accurate. It would show up if we had a year-to-date actual report as opposed to a budget-to-budget comparison.
Okay, great. Thank you. The other board members with questions? Patrick Morland, you have a question for yourself?
I don't so much have a question, but I do have a request.
Great.
In the memo, there's a pretty specific, what do you call it, motion that includes the revenues, the expenditure line, and then the amount of expenditures approved through the capital program. And so I think those details, as I can hear Bob in the back of my head saying, no. Always include the capital spend and the revenue and expense number.
I see.
That's acceptable to the board.
Yeah, that's a helpful request. Sounds like we've got a friendly amendment to Liz's motion to be more specific about approving the FY25 utility fund budget with revenues of such and such, expenses of so and so, and a capital plan with blah, blah, blah. Would you like to make that motion, or would you like to say it and we'll just accept it?
Let me allow Patrick to make whatever improvements to my motion he would like.
Your motion was
here it is.
Wonderful.
I have the information in front of me. I move to approve a FY25 utility fund budget with revenues of $6,706,954 and expenses of $6,946,645, including a capital plan with FY25 expenses of $1,367,000.
Great. And I'm seeing our parliamentarian over there give me a look as if to say, Liz can't amend her own motion. Is that what you're going to say?
I was going to say that I think it would be proper if the chair also polled the rest of the board to see if anybody objects to adopting the change in the motion.
How about that? Does anybody, thank you for helping out. Does anybody object to Liz's helpful amendment that makes our town attorney sleep better at night? Peter's smiling. I'm saying that he's assenting.
I'm all in,
He
man.
seems happy. Richard seems happy enough. Franz seems happy enough, and I'm certainly happy enough. Great. So we're quite happy with that. Is there any further discussion on the utility budget rather than the motion? Okay. Any discussion or questions from members of the public? Okay. I did see a hand. It has since been retracted.
That's my question.
Okay. Good. Thank you, Richard. Is there anybody on Zoom that wishes to ask a question? Okay. Liz just made a motion seconds ago that nobody's going to ask me to repeat, are they? I'll repeat it anyway. To approve a FY25 utility fund budget with revenues of $6,706,954 and expenses of $6,946,645, including a capital plan with FY25 expenses of what? Oh, I wrote over it. Is that one?
Yes, it's one.
Okay, phew. I thought it might be seven for a second. Of $1,367,000. All those in favor of that motion, please raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Passes 5-0. We have a utility fund budget. Okay. The next item of business is moving on to new business. Item A, announcing committee vacancies. And Peter Case has gallantly volunteered to read these items.
Was asked.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
I was being slick.
So we've got quite a few committee positions open, starting with the ADA Advisory Committee, looking for 4 openings on that committee. The Arts Committee, a total of 7 members, 2-year terms. There's 1 vacancy for that. Brattleboro Housing Partnership is looking for a 5-year term and 2 people to fill those 2 terms. Cemetery Committee, 3-year term, looking for 2 people. We have the Citizens Police Communications Committee for a 2-year term for 2 people. Conservation Commission, 4-year terms, looking for 3 people. Design Review Committee, a 1-year term, 1 person. Design Review Committee Alternative, 1 year, 1 person. Development Review Board, 3-year terms, looking for 2 people. Development Review Board Alternate, looking for, it's a 1-year term for 3 people. Energy Committee, looking for 5 people to serve a 3-year term. Fence Viewer, 1-year term, 3 people. There are currently no fence viewers in the town of Brattleboro.
You could have
right
as
now,
many
so
as 3.
This is dire. Honor Roll, again, 3 members, 1-year term, 3 people. Inspector Lumber, Shingles, and Wood, 1-year term, 1 person. Planning Commission, 4-year terms, looking for 3 people. Senior Solutions Advisory Council, a 1-year term, looking for either 1 or 2 positions. And a Weigher of Coal, 1 member allowed by charter, 2 members allowed by statute, 1-year terms, 1 or 2 people.
Thanks, Peter.
It's a little vague.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think the Charter Review Commission will be taking a look at it.
Yeah.
Inspector Lumber, Shingles, and Wood sounds like a very good detective show.
It does.
John, would you like to tell us about that committee again?
Yes, so if anyone is interested in serving the town in any of these capacities, they're more than welcome to come. Please come to the Town Committees Fair, which will be on next Wednesday, May 29th. And that will be at the Brooks Memorial Library from 6 to 7 p.m. And so that is an opportunity for people to come talk with members of those committees who are currently serving, to get a sense of what that's like, what the time commitment is like, and kind of some of the issues that you're dealing with. And so I think it'd be a good opportunity for anyone who's thought about joining town government.
Great. Thank you, John. Franz, you want to comment on this item?
Yes, I just want to chime in on that and say that, until you actually get involved in town affairs, committees, the mechanisms by which decisions are made, it can be kind of difficult to know, is this something I really want to do or not? You don't have a clear understanding of what the committee does, or what questions have come up that are being discussed, et cetera. And that's why this committees fair is such a good thing, because people who think, well, I don't know, I might be interested in that, but do I really want to make a commitment for whatever period of time's involved? I think this is a great opportunity to learn more and just see what it feels like to be in with those people who are doing those things, and maybe pick one that works for you. So I'm very high on this thing at the library next Wednesday, and I hope there will be a really good turnout of interested people who are looking to just participate more in what goes on in town.
Great. Thanks, Franz. If folks want to apply for one of these committee vacancies, they need to get in touch with the town manager's office.
Yes, they can get in touch with the town manager's office. They can also come to the committees fair and sign up right there. So we'll have a way to do that right in the spot.
Great. Thank you. Committees are really important to the work of this town, so please join in. Other board members wish to speak on this item? No? And I guess I could ask for members of the public whether they wish to comment on our announcing committee vacancies. We usually have it at the end, and so it's rarely commented upon.
When nobody's here.
Yes, exactly. Which is why we put it closer to the beginning tonight. Thank you, Peter, for that suggestion. Okay, so I'm going to move us on then to new business item B, the ordinance change for Chapter 18, Water and Sewer. This is a first reading. Patrick?
Yes, sir, that's correct. This is a first reading of changes to Chapter 18, which is our water and sewer ordinance. There are two sections, one for water rates and one for sewer rates. And to put it as simply as possible, this is to codify within our ordinance the changes that you just voted on moments ago related to water and sewer rates. So it takes what had been a 1% increase and replaces that with a 5% increase through each chapter, or rather through each article of the ordinance.
Great. Thank you, Patrick. Board members, questions, comments about this ordinance change? I will ask a sort of everyday kind of question. So a quarterly bill by an average user will go up roughly how many dollars?
So we looked into that. It's a little difficult to figure that out, but we estimated about $10 or so a quarter.
Okay. So the average Brattleboro water and sewer user will pay an extra $10 a month because of this action that we're going to take.
That's our
$10 a quarter. Thank you.
That's our estimate. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Richard?
So
Well, not good that they're paying extra, but good. Thank you for the information.
if we approve this at our next meeting, would the 5%, when would that become effective?
I believe it will become effective at the next billing starting after July 1st. So
Finance director is nodding her head, but maybe she wants to elaborate. Kim Frost?
It'll be in October.
in October.
That October billing. So when we bill for August, July, August, and September. So the October bill will have to move.
Okay. Thanks, Kim. Other board members, questions, comments? Franz?
Just kind of an observation that I think when we've done this in other years, or maybe just last year, we actually tended to set the rates for a number of years in advance, like as many as 5, I think. And this time we're just setting the rates for this coming year, which I don't have any problem with, but I thought that maybe some people watching are scratching their heads a little bit about that. John, do you want to give a little thinking about that?
Sure, yeah. Thanks, Franz. So the thinking there was that we've been doing, the past practice has been doing a rate change for a 5-year period, and we do a lot of calculations to figure out what that should be. Last year when we looked at it, we were actually running really well, so the board asked to reduce that rate at that time. We are now in this will be the 5th year of that 5-year period. And during this upcoming year, one of the line items in the budget is to do a rate study, which will inform us when the board looks at it again next year at this time, for setting a 5-year rate that is going to be could be done slightly differently. We're going to look at a bunch of different things in that rate study and try to come up with the best recommendations around rates that will keep us in a good condition moving forward.
And so the rate study like this, I mean, it just strikes me that as one of our enterprise funds, which is run on a business basis, we're selling something and people are buying, sort of, more or less. A business that was trying to set its rates in the future would do a study like this and try to get some expertise as to what the trends are and how we should be anticipating future cost increases or commitments to capital spending, et cetera. So I'm just trying to express my own understanding of why this rate study is a good idea, and that then a year from now we'll be looking at something with more of an informational basis for making longer term decisions.
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
Thanks, Franz. Other board members with questions about this item? Okay. Members of the public? People in the room? No. Folks on Zoom? No. Okay. There's no motion for this item. It's a first reading. It'll come back to us at our next meeting, I assume?
Yep, that is the plan.
Very good. Okay, so we will move on then to new business item C, which is another proposed ordinance change, a first reading for Chapter 8, Article 6, an ordinance about vacant buildings, and I am guessing that Sue Fillion is going to come and present, along with Steve Hayes. Planning Department Director, Planning Technician. When you are sitting comfortably, fire right in.
All right. Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Steve in a moment because he's done the research and worked on putting the ordinance together and doing some outreach. But this item was first before you in February when Steve presented kind of an overview of vacant building ordinances and best practice in Vermont as recommended by Vermont League of Cities and Towns. And at that time, the select board was looking to see something that kind of did everything, right? Addressed lots of different problems that we have with vacant buildings. So I'm going to turn it over to Steve to tell you about it. Sure,
yeah. So the ordinance change proposal that you have in front of you is primarily adapted out of that VLCT, Vermont League of Cities and Towns, boilerplate recommended ordinance. There are in that particular template a few places where the municipality will need to make decisions, and so we've made recommendations on those points within this, but we've also brought in some different language from existing ordinances within the state, primarily from the City of Rutland's ordinance, where there were some innovative things that were appreciated by town staff, and for any of those things that we have brought in different language that was not within that template, we've run that by the town attorney and made sure that the legal implications of those things were cleared in that regard. But I think maybe it would be best if I just take questions from you folks so that we don't just go point by point.
Could you maybe summarize the key points of the ordinance for the public? I know the board members have read the memo, but the public may not.
Yeah, so essentially it starts with a statement of the purpose that it is intended to address particular problems related to vacant and abandoned properties in the town. And in the previous meeting where this item was discussed, I think there was a productive conversation about what of that range of problems was of interest. And I think I recall hearing that a maximalist approach would be what was of interest to the select board at that time. So there's a list of things that are impacts negatively on the community as a result of that condition. And then we, of course, define all of the terms that we're using in there. It then goes into a list of the particular obligations of a property owner who has a vacant property. And then there is a registration permit that would be processed similarly to a zoning permit by this department, the planning department, with a fee that would double each year so as to prevent continued vacancy as a recognition that we're wanting to move things away from vacancy over time. And then there is a liability insurance requirement as well as an enforcement section, which would allow for us to enforce on properties that don't go through that registration process.
So there's two pieces to it. There is a registration if you have a vacant building, and that's defined as being unoccupied by a person or occupied by unauthorized persons for more than 180 days. And there's exceptions for warehouses and garages and vacation properties or buildings that are used on a seasonal basis. So in order to be vacant, it has to be unoccupied for 180 days. If it's a commercial unit or so multi-unit apartments or a strip mall, we're defining vacancy as at least 75% of all the units in the building are vacant. So that's when, at the end of 180 days, you would need to file for a registration permit with the planning department. And then the obligation is then to keep that in good repair. So the enforcement comes in if the building is not being kept in good repair, then there's a building safety officer who could be the person that does inspections for the fire department, could be one of the health officers that then they can begin enforcing it. And ultimately, one of the additions to it was the ability for the town to.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So one of the things that Attorney Fisher asked us to work into this was the ability for the town to request from a state court that the town be able to, in the event that it's necessary for immediate safety, enter onto the property and secure or demolish part or all of the structure. Again, only if it was immediately necessary for safety risk, and then put a lien on the property for that amount.
And another feature that we added based on a request from the fire department was that if it was a vacant building that wasn't being kept in good repair, and so it's kind of that in that enforcement place, they asked that a placard indicating that it's a vacant building and it's unsafe. So there's a common fire code, I think, placard, which is a red 24 by 24 inch with a white X. So they requested that they'd be able to put that on there. So that's in the ordinance as well.
Great. Would you just kind of quickly run through the penalties?
Sure. So the language that we have there is actually quite boilerplate. I think that we kept that identical to what was in the template up until the two sections that we added. And so that is allowing for, and this is something that's enabled by statute. It's not something that we would need to have any special permissions for. After 30 days from the warning that there is going to be an enforcement action if things are not resolved by the end of that 30-day period, the town would then be able to do municipal ticketing, which would be under the same authority that we have for zoning violations, and I believe is the same for health orders. And so statute allows for us to charge up to $800 per violation, which essentially means per day that this is not resolved, but that is up to, so it wouldn't be. And as I understand it, is often not allowed to go that high by the courts.
Great. Thanks, Steve. Sue, board members, discussion, questions. Elizabeth?
Thank you,
And
Daniel.
then Peter?
Well, I thank you both for this. This is something that I want to be enacted. Members of the public have spoken to me about the fact that they think it's an affront that people would leave a building vacant and in poor condition, an affront to the town as a whole. And I'm happy to see this in its present form. And I also think that we need to remember that we need the right regulations in place, because we've seen recently when we have an enforcement issue of a planning or a zoning issue, it does take a very long time to get resolved. And so we're better off having the proper base in the ordinance for what we want. So I thank you for that.
Thanks, Liz. Peter, and then Richard.
I just wanted some clarifications as to if we're going to go down to the registration permit and we enact that. Is my understanding like that permit is $800, or has that fee been set yet?
That fee has not been set. That would be a new fee that the select board could set.
And is there a recommendation that you would lead with? I mean,
did you see any fees?
I think it varied a lot between different communities that do have this in the state, but certainly it would not be something that would exceed even $1,000, of course, or I would assume. I think it would need to have a rational nexus with the actual severity of what we're trying to prevent, and if we went beyond that, then that could be legally inadvisable. It could get thrown out.
Okay, I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say we don't have a recommendation at this time. We could.
No, but what you're seeing out there is people just saying for this permit, it's going to cost you. You're going to leave this building in its current condition. It's going to be $1,000. Is what you've seen in other communities that have enacted something like this?
It's ranged quite a bit. Off the top of my head, I can recall that Bellows Falls or the town of Rockingham rather, had a several step fee schedule where, depending on what conditions were present, there was a range that you could be in, and they had ways to waive part or all of that fee depending on how you came into compliance. But I think the most you could have for the registration permit was something like $150 to $250. But in some cases, the fee was quite a bit more, and in some cases, it was less.
Okay. Great. Thanks, Steve. Richard?
I have two questions. One is, how will the town determine where all the vacant buildings are?
Yeah. So our department, we get a lot of complaints. We can look at water and sewer usage and where shutoffs have occurred and kind of see when they were shut off and how long they've been shut off. But mostly I would say, we hear from abutters, we observe it. I wouldn't say there's not a whole lot of buildings that fall within this. The zoning administrator in our office thought maybe 12 at this time. 12 max. So
it'll be up to your department to determine where those buildings are?
Yes.
Okay. And my other question is, if somebody follows all these rules for vacant building, then can they keep a vacant building indefinitely?
Yes. They'll keep putting it on the registry, and the registry doubles, right? That's the idea behind it.
So the doubling of the fee for each year that it continues to be registered, that's intended to make it increasingly unpalatable to do that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Thanks, Richard. Other questions? Elizabeth?
Well, I just want to clarify, but if this vacant building should become dilapidated to the point where the town considers emergency, it could demolish it in whole or in part. That's what you were saying, and then put a lien on the property for the value of that demolition.
Yes.
Right, but we would need to be given a
Court action.
a court approval to do that. We wouldn't just be able to do that on our own.
Thank you.
Thanks. France?
Don't have any questions, I don't think. I guess I was maybe a little bit confused. I didn't realize that the permit fee would double every year. I thought it was the penalties that would double every year. The penalties stay the same if the building is not in compliance maintenance-wise.
Right.
But every year that it remains vacant, the cost of the permit doubles.
Mm-hmm. Right, and there are a few ways to get off the register, one of which, of course, would be to fill the vacancy. But there are also, I think this was also requested by Attorney Fisher, that we added within the enforcement section that if you are able to show that you're renovating substantially the property to bring it into compliance, because you otherwise couldn't market the building and couldn't find someone to fill that vacancy, that you could be removed from the register for that year because you are bringing yourself up with the intent to fill.
So one other thing just occurs to me. How would I phrase this? Well, it's not coming clear to me, but there's, well, I'll come back to it if I think of it in that way.
Great. Thanks for the presentation. Thanks for answering all those questions. I think it's really helpful to flesh it out a little bit. My assumption would be that if we do go ahead and adopt this ordinance after a second reading, that we would then have an item before us to figure out an appropriate registration permit, and that you would do some research to present to us some options.
Can I jump back in?
Sure.
I was just thinking that there may be a property that somebody owns, somebody else rents for a long period of time, let's say. And then the person who rented the property decides, well, I don't want to do that anymore, and they move out, so the property is now vacant, but it's still rented by the owner to this person who's leaving it vacant by choice. Who's on the hook for the registration fee and any penalties?
If I'm following your scenario, it's always going to be the property owner that's on the hook for the registration. If they could provide us a lease and say it's under lease, that wouldn't start the 180 days.
So the building could be empty, but rented with a valid lease, and then it would not be considered vacant under this. And suppose somebody built some big home improvement type store somewhere on Putney Road, and it was rented long term, but not in use. So that would not fall under this.
Because that's sorry, Daniel.
No, go ahead.
I think in our interpretation, because it's in a shopping plaza and the rest of the plaza is occupied, no, it would not follow under this. We wouldn't enforce on that.
Got it.
Yeah, we have that 75% of the structure's units being vacant as the threshold there, because we figured that if it was set at every unit needs to be vacant, then perhaps a large commercial structure or residential structure could sort of game that by having one unit rented and none of the others. But 3/4 vacancy seemed like enough of a problem that it still satisfied.
3/4 of the storefronts, not 3/4 of the square footage.
Right, of the units, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Satisfied?
I think I'm satisfied.
Yeah, okay.
Can I ask another question?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm wondering if the definition of vacant is adequate for this. And the reason I say that is, I'm thinking of a scenario where somebody has an apartment building and say it's 160 days, and they bring somebody in and they sleep there overnight for one night. would that skirt this intention? Would they be able to say that it's not a vacant building?
I don't know the answer to that. Probably need to.
Not that people are devious.
Yeah, no, well, this is a first reading, right? So this is a good opportunity to kind of flag those questions, and if we could, look into that. I assume that we would need to sort of know with some level of confidence that, like, the structure has been empty for 180 days consecutively. And yeah, so.
I think that's easily circumvented with some sort of a lease, I would think, on file, right? If that's one of the concerns, some sort of an arrangement that we can probably set, like a month to month or something like that.
So this is something that maybe you can come back to us with a bit more information about. Take a look at the with the twos and wherefores. Any other questions from the board before we go to the public? No? Okay, members of the public, questions about this proposed ordinance? I see a hand raised at the back. If you can make it through the crowd. Please introduce yourself.
Oscar Heller, Brattleboro. I think the idea of expanding this a little more in the direction of these questions is really interesting, because I think the problem of a vacant or dangerous building is part of it, but I think if you were looking at this as a townwide problem, you'd also look at the idea of, big empty storefronts on Putney Road, or even a storefront. There are storefronts on Main Street that have been vacant for probably over a year and probably would not qualify for this because they're part of a big building, most of which is rented. So I think trying to shape, it would be a little bit of an expansion, but trying to shape this to cover those cases, to incentivize people to there's nothing wrong with these buildings that aren't being rented. It's just that there's no pressure on people to rent them, so they keep the rents where they want them, and there's tons of stuff that could go in there, but it doesn't happen. So shaping this in a way to address that, I think would be really good, because you get into this area where empty storefronts downtown start to become a cost paid by the whole community. So someone's individual market decision not to rent, which is theoretically fine, begins to be a cost paid by other people. So I don't know. I think there's an interesting opportunity here to go a little further.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks, Oscar. So my understanding is, something that is deemed vacant will be required to have a permit, and that the permit will be a sort of disincentive, right? The doubling of the permit is a disincentive to allow something to remain vacant. For a vacant building that is also found to be unsafe, there will then be, conditions put upon the owners saying fix this, this, and this by 30 days, and then on day 31, penalties for those things that remain unfixed, which will escalate every day afterwards. So there maybe isn't a carrot in here, but there are two slightly different sticks.
Correct. Yeah, I mean, the carrot is to get off the list.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Other members of the public who wish to speak on this matter? Nobody on Zoom? Nobody in the room? Board members, any final questions for our planning department? Well,
just
half
thanks.
of our planning department.
Thank you.
Yes.
Good ordinance.
Yeah, it's really helpful. Thank you. So this will come back as a second read-in, and then adoption. Patrick?
Oh, well,
I didn't see a hand, but
yeah, Mr. Ozer had his hand up for a moment, but it's back down. But now it's back up.
Mr. Ozer, would you like to speak on this matter?
Hello. I don't know if I have a question that's formed yet, but Daniel said something interesting about a carrot, and I'm wondering if there needs to be, or there could be, or there should be a carrot somewhere in the ordinance. I was thinking in terms of, is there a point where you have an interaction with the owner to try to figure out what's going on? And I have a flashback to like foreclosures and tax sales and that kind of thing, where the owner gets involved in the process, and there may be some simple things that need to be done or connections that need to be done that could resolve the issue. So I'm wondering if there could be some sort of carrot or some sort of mediation point in the ordinance. And I don't know what that's going to be, so I'm not too articulate as to what that looks like. But that was my question.
Thanks, Bob. Sue?
Yeah,
Any thoughts
so
on that?
I'm not sure how we would codify something like that. We can look into it. What I would say in the department, I mean, we're constantly doing that. We are in touch with a lot of the vacant property owners. We are providing them information on the Vermont Housing Improvement Program where they can get funding to create housing units. We don't, even with the zoning violation, we don't start with here's your violation. It starts as conversation. It starts, here's what you can do with the property. What can we help you with? And trying to go about it that way. Kind of a ticket or some sort of violation letter is usually the last step in that process. So,
great, thanks.
But I can look into codifying something.
Yeah,
I just don't know.
Yeah, thank you. It does kind of make me wonder whether there are any places that incentivize getting something from vacant to filled. I'm imagining some things I don't even want to say them out loud, but we would like our vacant properties to join either the housing market or the commercial market. Mm-hmm. And you would sort of, I guess, think that there's a natural benefit to doing that anyway. But in the case of some buildings that have remained vacant for a long time, there's obviously not. Otherwise it wouldn't have happened. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are ways to incentivize it out there, probably outside of the ordinance.
Yes.
What I would say about the vacant buildings in Brattleboro, that some of them can take a long time to put a development together to get it off the ground. So, sometimes we're trying to work through that and put the pressure on them that way. Sometimes it's a business decision. They own multiple properties and it's not the priority to them. They'd rather keep it boarded up. Or they're waiting for the next, I can think of one property where they're waiting for a new tenant to then demolish a building, right? So sometimes it's a business decision. And then there are other properties in town that I think that people are just overwhelmed with and really don't know what to do.
Right.
Sometimes it's just, where do you want to put the incentive?
Yeah. Thanks, Sue. Okay, board. Elizabeth.
I just want to mention that, your office is always open to having those discussions with people who may need to talk to.
Definitely.
Okay. Seems like a successful first reading. Richard.
One more question. Do you have a sense, or do you know if any of the vacant properties that you're aware of have any tax liability?
I do not know that. The ones off the top of my head that I know about do not have a tax liability at this point.
Are you saying that they are behind on their taxes? Is that?
Yeah, that's what I meant, because I was just wondering if that was another channel for something to happen.
Right. I generally don't believe so, but we can look into that for the next time too.
Great. Thank you. So, board, this will come back for a second reading and possible adoption. Thank you for your comments. And we'll move on to our final agenda item of the evening, item D. Suitability of town properties for housing development. And before Sue and Steve present, I would just like to thank you for this work. I think it's really thorough and is going to be helpful for us. One of our goals is around housing. This will help us. Board, we can thinking about this today, but also maybe when we have our priority set in retreat, when we're thinking about revolving loan fund questions and that kind of thing. So I just wanted to thank you for this work.
You're welcome.
Take it away.
All right. So the goal of this project was to look at our town-owned lands to do kind of a first cut to look and see if they're suitable for housing development or potential housing development. And this was a strategy in the Housing Action Plan and also kind of fits in with one of your priorities from last year. And so we did this. Steve did the desktop GIS work, so he can speak to that as well. We did it through kind of looking at doing a desktop survey of the GIS data that we had available to us, water, sewer, slope, lot size. We looked at the zoning regulations and property records. And generally, this was a pretty objective review based on those criteria. And then we brought in some subjectivity in that we made some assumptions that, you as a select board might want to upend that tonight, and that's okay too. This is kind of a first cut. We made the assumption that for it to be kind of viable, it had to be at least 4 units of housing, and that would require at least a 3,000 square foot ground floor area to the building. We also ranked sites on page 17. There is kind of a value matrix where we took the sites that we, in the end, found to be high suitable, moderately suitable, or low suitability. And we kind of tried to display it in a way. And we made some judgment there. We ranked greenfield sites as kind of the easiest to be able to develop. We looked at parking lots and felt that those were, could be moderate. There is a use there, but it would be easier to develop. And we also looked at some of the public parks. And I know that, so there's a little political judgment there that a parking lot would be easier to develop than a public park. And so we ranked and came down to a list of about 20. I think in the end it was, sorry, I don't have the number right in front of me, but about 23 sites. 23 sites, thank you. And there's potentially more. And just because it sits on this list doesn't mean that, if you put it in the hands of a developer or a development company, that they would find that it could pencil out. They might find some other constraints, and we didn't really get too deep in any of the kind of deed research and legal either. Sites that we found to have a high suitability are here at the Municipal Center. There's the potential for infill housing in the parking lot, and then this is kind of the only building that we really kind of interacted with that this could be a repurposed building for housing. The police station on Black Mountain Road has a green space in front of it that could have high suitability. The Harris lot and kind of the Gibson-Aiken parking lot, a couple of years ago, some of you might recall that we had done an RFQ to see about interest in developing that lot. So we found that still to be high suitability. The High Grove parking lot, and the Harmony lot, which actually historically there were some buildings in there. So those are the ones that ranked for high suitability, but obviously there might be ones that fall off. The moderate suitability sites, the town owns about 6 or 9 parcels.
I think technically it's 9 parcels.
Yeah. We call it the Kettle Pond subdivision. So if you know the Kettle Pond, which is kind of situated between Fairground and Marlborough Avenue and Wilson's Woods there, and it's kind of by the Public Works salt area and sand pit. But the town owns several lots down there and a right-of-way. There's some environmental constraints potentially and some Act 250 permitting issues, but these are undeveloped lots that could have housing on them. Both commons in West Brattleboro Village and the Brattleboro Town Common here could accommodate some housing. Obviously, politically, that might be a little bit more challenging. We have a parcel of land at the corner of Cotton Mill Hill and King Avenue. That's got a zoning issue. It's in the industrial zoning district, but if the zoning district changed, that might be able to have some housing there. The Kroll lot and Morningside Cemetery, there's a little undeveloped part there as well. And then we have a lot of our additional parks fall under low suitability, so I don't necessarily list them all. The report talks a little bit about town buildings. The library, I think, can have another story put on it. We've thought that the fire stations probably weren't suitable. We didn't really engage with these in this matrix, but we could take a look at them. Public Works in its existing condition would be challenging, but maybe a new Public Works could accommodate some housing.
Great.
So.
Thank you, Sue and Steve, for that work. Board members, questions about this report? Elizabeth?
Thanks. Again, I thank you for this. It's very informative. I wonder, I know other states have a penalty towards municipalities if they develop a park site that was designated for a park, and often require the return of any funding that was used to build the park. And I wonder, does Vermont have such a program?
I am not aware.
Yeah, I am also not aware. I know we talked a little bit about this with Attorney Fisher, but I think specifically asking him that question would probably be very useful.
And I would, generally speaking, not be disposed to use a park or parkland for this purpose. But there are some, certainly all the high suitability sites and maybe the Kettle Pond site that I'm not that familiar with, but they all seem like good ideas to pursue. And I would assume that the purpose of this presentation is to explore this high suitability sites a little bit more to get our input as to next steps.
Yeah, I think we are looking for your input, and it could change kind of the suitability of sites. But yeah, we probably, we could do a little deeper dive. And then there was funding set aside from the in the RLF to do it. It was based on an estimate of doing 2 sites and doing some pre-development feasibility. So, I mean, that would ultimately, I think, be the end game.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
But by the way, I just want to say the Harris lot gets my thumbs up because I know we previously pursued that, and certainly an easy lift.
Easy-ish. I actually had a question about next steps, right? So you've presented us here with 23 sites. Really, the high suitability and the moderate suitability ones are as described, and the low suitability ones maybe we want to just kind of ignore unless the board wants to say otherwise. And so what kind of next steps would be helpful? I was kind of envisaging this as like a first bit of information, maybe helping with our priority set and helping with our kind of housing goal. But what actions from the board would be useful? What further consideration might be needed?
Yeah, I think what would be helpful is knowing what is your, are public parks off the list for you? How do you feel about parking lots? I think one thing we have to dig deeper, if you said yes to all parking lots, well, what does that mean for parking? And that might mean having a consultant come in and looking at the downtown parking. But if you're thinking that there's maybe 1 or 2, and I would say also developing a parking lot doesn't mean we completely lose parking, because there are techniques, to put parking and then building above. So I think that would be helpful. I would draw your attention to it falls under low suitability because there are probably some zoning that we need to look at. But some of the properties on Elliott Street that front on Elliott Street have, McNeil's was built. There's kind of a plateau. It was built up. That could be a site. It's got some challenges, but I'm not sure that it should definitely be ruled out if that was to become town property.
Great. Thanks, Sue. So feelings about parks and parking lots, developing thereof. France?
I think parking lots are a good option. I think preserving parking and building above the parking lots are a good option. But I keep coming back to the same point. A couple of points I come back to, but one of them is, why is it so expensive to build housing, and where are we going to get the money? I guess we've heard in the background, there's lots of state money available and stuff like that. But, if we did want to proceed with building either on, say, High Grove or the Harris lot, and, an elevated structure that preserved parking underneath, is that really a feasible project for a town like Brattleboro? And what would be the town's role as opposed to a private developer's role? This is looking down the road a ways, but how is our decision going to actually help you make something real happen? That's really my question, I guess.
Great question.
So I guess there's different ways that a development could happen. The town doesn't have to be the developer, and I don't think we're sitting here thinking the town would. We could have some private public partnership where, I've seen this more. St. Albans has done this quite a bit, and they have a TIF district, a tax increment financing district, where, they have built parking structures to and done some parking and bringing infrastructure to the site in the downtown, and then the developer is doing the rest of the development. So taking care of some of that infrastructure cost is something that the municipality does, and then and I'm not sure who's actually owning it there. I think the developer owns the property, but that's how the town assists. It could be that we work with a development consultant. They kind of look and they figure out what kind of project can they fund there, in which ways. It could be that the town is applying for community development block grants like we do for lots of developments. It could be that we sell the property for $1 because we know then it's going to be put into productive tax use and will benefit. So there'll be lots of decisions to make if we can get that far with a project.
Thank you, Sue. Richard?
Well, as far as the parking garage and parking lots, it doesn't seem reasonable to give up many parking spaces in Brattleboro. I think really the only option, if you're going to do anything, is to build up over them. I had another question unrelated to that is, you're talking about public-private partnerships, and I think I think there's a very good untapped potential there. And what I would like to see to complement this this study that you presented, is to look at some private parcels of land that have good potential for housing. And sort of maybe talk, and then once you do that, to maybe have a meeting with some of the landowners and ask them if they've ever thought about putting housing there, or how come nothing's happened in the last 10 years, something like that.
Mm-hmm. We've definitely done some of that. Not targeted mailings or anything, but if we know somebody's looking at a property, we'll suggest housing and some resources for it. But I think that there is, more that can be done. The modeling that Steve did, the GIS modeling, we have talked about taking that to all parcels in town. That'll be pretty easy to do.
Okay. The municipal center, we have previously engaged a kind of feasibility study to look at turning this building into housing. So that's clearly something that previous boards at least have expressed a public interest in. Not hearing any opposition to that at this time. The Harris lot, Highgrove lot, and Harmony lot, I just want to kind of put it out there and see whether there's any feelings on the board about those lots. Liz already said Harris lot. Harris lot is the one behind the Gibson Aiken. Are we saying that we'd be okay with potentially allowing housing development on those places?
I'm not crazy about Harmony lot. I think that I'm want to say it's impossible, but to me, it would just kind of confuse or congest the downtown in a
I
somewhat
think
undesirable
it
way.
also removes a little bit of our downtown's epicenter, which is feel like the Harmony lot. Feel sort of the same way about the High Grove lot as well, and about kind of retaining those, but the space. What's escaping? Harris lot. Yeah, I've always thought that was like a good spot to. There's quite a bit of tarmac back there.
Elizabeth?
I just want to mention that there's several pieces of the puzzle that need to fit together for this building, and they may or may not include the High Grove lot. So I would keep the High Grove lot out of contention until all the ducks are in a row.
Sorry, could you say a little more about that?
Yes.
What's happening at High Grove?
There's plans afoot that are probably confidential to reuse of this building, and those plans may or may not include the High Grove lot, and therefore I wouldn't want it to be seen as an independent project when it may be part of another.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Thanks, Franz. Yes. So, I think we did kind of hear there from two members that the Harmony lot seems a little kind of less of a good option. I thought in the memo, the way that you described potential development on the High Grove lot was kind of interesting. If I understood it correctly, sort of like a townhome kind of style development at the back, sort of on the retaining walls.
Yeah, and that might be just my own sort of taste or editorializing, but it seems like that would likely be a better use of that particular space, given that it's fairly shallow, although not as shallow as it might look on a map, and quite long. It could basically continue to function as a through path and perhaps retain on-street parking and probably an excellent view, while also being able to suit in that back row of parking.
Yeah. Okay. So Sue and Steve, are you getting helpful information? John, are you getting helpful information from the board here?
Yeah.
Yeah, Elizabeth?
I got one more little pesky question. So the Summit Circle lots, I assume that they're available for development should anyone want them now, right? For individual housing lots? Is that what they are?
They're large parcels. One does not look to have a lot of, it's got a lot of slopes. Finding like a buildable plateau might be a challenge. And then there are two that I think so we haven't looked at the deeds, and so that we could look into that as a next phase.
But they're kind of lots that were accessed and taken over by the town, and could, if someone wanted to develop them like the rest of that subdivision, they could?
Believe so.
Yeah.
At this point, yeah.
The zoning would limit the density at the moment, but should they be rezoned, then they could potentially see more than just one house on each one of them. Whereas that one that has less potential because of the slope constraints is actually in a developed zoning district, so that if it was more suitable, could be developed with a greater density. So that was primarily what brought those two more suitable parcels down in this, is that they're just still considered rural at the moment.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's hear from the public. Ms. Blickenstaff has been waiting patiently. I suspect this is Frick, but maybe not. We'll see.
Are correct. I asked her if she could help me figure out how to change the name, and neither one of us could figure it out, but here I am. The lots over by the high school and other traditional lots seem to make sense. I am curious why they were secondary to things like parking lots.
Yeah.
the
So part of it, there'd have to be a little water, not very far, but you'd have to construct a road where all the parking lots are on a paved road already. So you'd have to construct the road down there, although we do have the right of way. There'd be a little extension of water and sewer, although it is right there. It's primarily dealing with the kettle pond and understanding what the buffer would be. And then these parcels are subject to Act 250. So it's, yeah, there's just a couple of more permitting hurdles that we identified, but I wouldn't say that they're necessarily project killers either at this level.
Have other questions for
Yeah, the Harmony lot seems like putting anything over that would dramatically change the nature of downtown, which I think would be unfortunate. I would like to point out that putting any structures over a parking lot would be similar to having a parking garage, and would be a very expensive and also sort of, in terms of thermal performance, would be problematic compared to building on the ground. And I'd like to further point out that we're having a hard time maintaining the current parking garage, which, if maintenance doesn't happen there fairly soon, that could become a tear down. So I would urge the board to pay some attention to maintaining what we already have in that regard. As far as deeming steep lots as unbuildable or difficult to build, I would urge a more creative look at that, especially if they're south-facing lots. If we're taking global warming seriously, we need to start building in a way that does not depend on space heating, and we can easily do that in this climate if we pay attention to how we build. And it's not expensive to build that way. It just requires a slightly different mindset. So that's part of my input. The other thing I have to say is that there are impediments to full use of already existing housing that are largely not in the town's control, except for possibly directing the police department to deal with rentals as they would single-family houses in terms of enforcement of various infractions. A lot of it has to do with the state and how the courts deal with things, and those are things that the select board could possibly influence if you chose to. So I would love to have a further discussion about that at some later date, but I have a lot of thoughts about that.
Thank you, Frick. Appreciate your comments. Any other questions from members of the public? Mr. Hallett?
Oscar Heller, Brattleboro. Quickly, just because no one else has said it, I would say for myself that I would not be particularly heartbroken to see something developed in Harmony. It serves as the center of the downtown in some ways, but I don't find it's a big square parking lot. I don't find it particularly, inviting or welcoming, and some sort of interesting, lively, mixed-use residential commercial thing there might be a lot more pleasant. So I wouldn't necessarily, that just, one person saying that it might not be the worst idea ever. The other thing, I was just curious as a member of the public, I'm a little unclear, probably because I'm not as involved with this as you guys are, but I'm a little unclear on what the next steps are or what a roadmap is or something like that. And I'm getting a 1% feeling of both sides kind of asking each other what the next steps are. And, so I'm just curious to know what members of the public can look to sort of see and pay attention to in the next couple months on this.
Great, thank you. That's still my question, really. How will this come back to us and in what form?
So the way I envision it coming back is that we'll have a recommendation of, 2, maybe 3 sites that we think we should have some more pre-development work done on. So hiring a consultant to figure out what is the development that could happen, what is the financial feasibility of it, and where are the gaps, kind of thing. We might take this list and kind of vet it with a couple of the developers around and, try to get their feel. That could be a next phase that we do. We'll also look in, if you say you're interested in the Kettle Pond, we'll actually look into the Act 250 permit that's on there and kind of drill down a little bit. If you said you were interested in the Black Mountain Road parcel, we could think about, making a recommendation that it should be subdivided or something like that. We can also look into some of the models of development for you. John had mentioned that Lebanon, New Hampshire is actually their town is working with a bank and doing employee housing. So, we could come back with a couple different models that development could look like. But ultimately, we'll try to narrow it down so that we can then hire the consultant to go and do some pre-development work.
Great, that's helpful. Reactions to what Sue just said?
I think it's
Okay.
a fine plan.
Fine plan, okay. Seeing happy sort of faces. Yeah, I mean, if you feel like you have helpful direction that's clear from the board, then great. And if not, please let us know, and we will do our best to provide that. Okay. Franz?
I'm wondering how other board members reacted or didn't react to what Richard brought up about private landowners. And you said it would actually be pretty simple to apply these same sorts of criteria to private parcels in town. To me, that opens up some really attractive possibilities, because then we'd have much more latitude to decide, what type of development would we want in what specific locations, which to me is a critically important piece of this. Yes, we want housing, but there's housing and there's housing, and there are certain areas where I think we'd really like to invest our, if not dollars, at least our time and energy in having more housing in those areas. But we don't own the land. So I'd love to see, what came from that discussion that Richard started, a similar set of criteria applied to private parcels that we would consider developable, and might want to prioritize a process of approaching those landowners. At least that'd be something where I'd, be eager to see the results of that. And I wonder if other board members feel the same.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. Thank you, Richard, for mentioning it earlier. I'm not sure it's really relevant to this agenda item, and I wouldn't want us to walk too far down that road.
Yeah.
Because I don't think it's been warned for that. So maybe there's a future agenda where we can kind of take a look at how the town has been working with private landowners. Because right now what we're talking about is the suitability of town properties. Would that be sufficient?
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about.
Okay. Elizabeth?
I just wanted to reiterate what I thought were the key sites for suitability, and that would be the Municipal Center, the Harris Lot, and the Kettle Ponds.
And I would be curious about the police station parcel. I don't think it's very large, but maybe I'm wrong. Franz?
A question about what is it, King Street, King Avenue, King Road? Mm-hmm. I drove by there today. It's a very short stub of a road, and I didn't see any place in there that looked like it was owned by the town. I did see down below by the old Vermont Bread Company site, behind the cotton mill, there's a very nice big flat parcel there. And I didn't know if what I was looking at and what you were thinking about.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an odd parcel. I think I don't want to assume why it was zoned the way it was, but the parcel that the town owns that's zoned as industrial, at least looking at a flat map, it looks like it relates to all those parcels down there, the cotton mill and along Vernon Road that are industrial, and they're actually industrial, but our small parcel, it's sort of wedge-shaped, triangular, I guess. It's on the southern side of that road, and it's not large, but it definitely has a flat, seemingly buildable area that if it wasn't an industrial parcel, which totally prohibits housing, then it would theoretically be able to have a reasonably sized building, maybe one of the missing middle types that we allow for, so 4 to 9 units.
And I know the neighbors park on it frequently, so
Yeah.
if you went by and there was parking going on, it's...
Yeah, it just looks like it's part of their little neighborhood there.
yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Feel like we might have reached the end of that discussion. Seeing no further interest from the public. There is only one more item on our agenda, and that is to make a motion.
I was thinking a motion to adjourn the meeting might be appropriate.
Great.
So I will make that motion.
Francis made that motion. It is to adjourn. All those in favor, please raise their hand and say aye.
Aye.
Aye. We have adjourned. Thank you, Sue, Steve, Patrick, John, Russ, BCTV, the Select Board, Oscar Heller, interpreters.
Thanks.
Good evening. How about that? Before 8 o'clock. Wow.
Those did it twice.